The air in the prairie town carried a heaviness that day, dry dust rising in the heat, clinging to every boot, every breath, every broken soul that wandered its narrow streets. The wind moved without kindness, whistling through splintered shutters and rattling loose signs above the saloon. It smelled of horse dung, sweat, and desperation. 17-year-old Elena stood in the shadow of the trading post, her dress thin, the fabric stiff with age and sun. Her mother's hand gripped her arm, not gentle, but firm, like one grips a bundle of cloth before selling it. She looked at her mother's face for some flicker of softness, but found none. Only a hard-set jaw, lips pressed shut, eyes never meeting hers. Her father waited inside with the trader, voices low, coins clinking faintly on the wooden counter. She could hear every word, as if each one was meant to slice her open. "She's 17, strong enough for work." "But Baron," her father said, his voice cracking only once before he steadied it with whiskey-thick resolve. The trader's laugh was a sound like gravel spilling from a bucket. "Baron or not, I can find a use. A man don't pay for children. He pays for silence, for service, for warmth when the nights turn cold." Elena's stomach turned, but her eyes did not falter. She stared at the warped glass window, at the way the sunlight bled through it in crooked lines. A hawk circled far above the rooftops, its shadow flickering over the street, free, sharp, unbound. She envied it more than breath. When the deal was struck, her father stepped out, shoulders stiff. He didn't look at her, just shoved her forward. A muttered line slipped from his lips like poison he'd carried too long. "A woman who cannot bear is no woman at all." The words landed heavier than the coin purse he clutched. Her wrists were bound with coarse rope, the fibers biting into her skin, leaving faint trails of blood where she struggled. The trader lifted her onto the back of a creaking wagon like one might hoist a sack of grain. She landed on rough boards, splinters digging into her side. The smell was suffocating. Damp hay, old leather, the sour stench of sweat. The wagon jolted forward. Each wheel's groan echoed like a dirge. Elena's eyes lifted to the horizon where the sky stretched wide and merciless, painted in cruel shades of gold and gray. Vultures traced lazy circles high above, their wings black strokes against the light, mocking her as if already tasting her despair. The road hummed with emptiness. The only sounds were the trader's heavy breathing, the clop of hooves, the rasp of rope against her wrists when she shifted. She closed her eyes and tried to remember the sound of her childhood. Her mother's lullabies, her father's laugh before hardship rotted it away. But memory betrayed her. All she could hear now was the echo of his last words. Hours passed, like lifetimes. Every bump of the wagon jarred her bones. Every gust of hot wind stung her face. Her lips cracked with thirst, but she would not ask. She would not beg. To beg was to break, and she refused them that victory. The trader glanced back once, his eyes lingering. His smile was not of kindness, but of ownership. Elena turned her gaze away, fixing it instead on the horizon where the sun dipped low. Shadows stretched long across the land, and the chill of night began creeping into her skin. As darkness settled, the wagon stopped by a campfire. Sparks danced upward into the black sky, swallowed quickly by the endless dark. He tied her to a post like livestock, her back pressed against rough bark, rope cutting deeper. The flames painted her face in shades of orange and ash, her breath visible in small clouds as the night grew colder. The trader chewed his meat in silence, grease shining on his beard. He didn't speak to her, didn't need to. His silence was a cage, his glances the lock. But Eleanor's eyes, though rimmed with tears she would not shed, remained unbroken. There was defiance there, faint, but burning, like an ember refusing to die even when the wind howled hardest. She tilted her head back, gazing at the stars that pricked the sky like distant fires. Each one seemed impossibly far, but she clung to them with a kind of desperate reverence. They were witnesses, at least, to her humiliation, witnesses to the betrayal that had stripped her of home, of name, of worth in her parents' eyes, somewhere deep inside her chest, beneath the ache. And the raw sting of rope, a vow began to form, quiet, wordless, but fierce. If she was to be carried off into darkness, she would carry with her this ember. She would not let them see her soul bend. And so the night stretched on, the fire crackling, the coyotes wailing in the distance. The stars wheeling slow above. Elena sat bound, her body shaking, her eyes still hard as stone. She did not yet know it, but this was not the end of her story. This was only the bargain that would set everything else ablaze. The pines rose like sentinels. In the cold dawn, their black spines cutting against a pale sky. Mist curled low through the trunks, carrying the sharp, resinous scent of sap and earth. Somewhere deep in those woods, an axe struck rhythmically. Wood meeting steel, steel meeting silence. Jonas Hale worked alone, his breath fogged in the crisp air, beads of sweat already tracing paths down his scarred cheek. The mark ran from temple to jaw, a crooked white river carved years ago by splintered timber. Folks in town said the scar made him look like a villain. His children said it made him look like a warrior. Jonas himself never said what he thought. It was just a part of his face, like the eyes that had seen too much. The forest echoed with his labor. Each swing of the axe was steady, unrelenting. The sound of cracking wood rolled through the valley like distant thunder. Jonas paused only to drag the felled logs into neat stacks, his hands rough, palms hardened to stone, his back bent with effort, but never faltered. Work was all he knew now. Work, and the 4 small lives waiting at home. By the time the sun bled, over the tree line, the cabin stirred awake. It stood at the edge of Timber Creek, built from the very trees that surrounded it. Smoke curled from its chimney, carrying the smell of cornmeal and bacon into the morning air. Inside, the voices of children wove warmth into the silence Jonas left behind. The youngest, Mary, barely 4, dragged a doll made of rags across the wooden floor. Her giggles filled the cabin like birdsong. The twins, Luke and Samuel, tumbled over each other, arguing over who got the last biscuit. And then there was Anna, the oldest at 10, already mothering the others with hands far too small for the burden. She tied Mary's hair, hushed the twins, swept the hearth. She had her mother's eyes, gentle, steady, but her smile came less often these days. Jonas returned at noon, shoulders wide as a doorframe, boots carrying the dust of the woods. The children swarmed him like roots clinging to a great tree. Luke climbed his leg, Samuel tugged at his sleeve, Mary squealed until he hoisted her onto his shoulder. Only Anna stood back a little, watching with a gaze that knew her father's weariness, even when he smiled. He set down Mary, kissed the crown of her head, and lowered himself into the heavy chair by the fire. His frame filled it completely, the chair groaning under his weight. The room seemed smaller when he was home, the air thick with the presence of a man who never spoke much, but carried silence like a mantle. Townfolk whispered about Jonas, said he was dangerous, said the scar wasn't from an accident but from a fight, that he'd killed a man in the woods and the pines themselves had kept the secret. Some said he had a temper like dynamite, that one wrong word could set him blazing. None of them came close enough to find out. They saw his broad shoulders, the way he kept to himself, and spun their own stories. But the children knew better. They clung to him not because they feared him, but because he was all they had. When Mary crawled into his lap with sticky fingers and laid her head against his chest, Jonas's hand, calloused, scarred, rested gently against her back, and for a moment, the hardness in him softened. Yet every night, when the laughter ebbed and the cabin fell into quiet, the emptiness returned. Jonas would sit by the fire, staring at the second chair that remained forever empty. His wife's shawl still hung on its back, untouched. The flames painted shadows across the hollow of his face as he sat there, eyes fixed but unfocused. Man haunted by the warmth he'd lost. Sometimes the children caught him there, his shoulders bowed, fingers tangled in his beard. They never spoke of it. Anna would quietly place another log on the fire and slip back to bed, pretending not to notice the weight in her father's silence. The nights were long, the kind that gnawed at a man's soul. The howl of coyotes drifted from the hills, and the river whispered endlessly just beyond the trees. Jonas drank that silence in like a punishment. His life was a rhythm of work and fatherhood, and yet beneath it beat the hollow ache of something unfinished, something broken. Still he endured. Endurance was what Jonas Hale did best. He cut trees until his arms trembled, carried logs until his spine screamed, laughed with his children when laughter was all they needed. The world might see him as a scarred giant, unapproachable, but in truth, He was just a man keeping 4 small flames alive in a cabin that would have gone dark without him. And far away, beyond hills, beyond dust-choked roads, beyond the reach of his knowing, another flame flickered in a wagon, a girl bound, betrayed, yet unbroken. 2 lives moving like distant rivers, unaware they would one day meet and carve a canyon into the land around them. For now, Jonas Hale rose each morning to the mist and the axe, and laid each night beside the fire with the weight of memory pressing against his chest. He did not know her name, did not know her fate, but the world was already pushing them, step by step, toward the same storm. The wagon rattled into Timber Creek under a gray sky. Clouds pressed low, heavy with rain not yet fallen. The trader sat hunched, reins in hand, his eyes glinting with the slyness of a man who smelled profit. Behind him, bound and silent, Elena watched the pines draw closer, their shadows swallowing the road like teeth. He had heard whispers of Jonas Hale, widower, father of 4, a man in need of a woman to keep his house. Not a wife, perhaps, but a body to warm the nights, a pair of hands to stir the pot. The trader licked his lips at the thought of easy coin. Jonas was stacking timber when the wagon rolled into the clearing. His axe stood buried deep in a stump. His shirt clung to his back with sweat, and his children gathered behind him, curious and cautious. Jonas straightened, his broad frame blocking the cabin door, his scar catching the light like a blade. The trader grinned. "Heard you lost your wife. Heard you got little ones need raising. I brought something might ease your burden." With a jerk of his chin, he motioned to the back of the wagon. Jonas's eyes followed and froze. Elena sat bound, wrists raw, dress torn, hair tangled by wind. But it wasn't her frailty that caught him. It was her gaze, storm dark, unyielding, refusing to bow even as she trembled. A look that said she had been broken by many hands, yet her soul still stood. Jonas's jaw tightened. He stepped forward, voice low, thunderous. "Untie her." The trader blinked. "She ain't free, Hale. Cost me coin and she'll cost you. A man needs a woman, even you." Jonas's hand shot out, seizing the man by his collar, dragging him down from the wagon like a rag doll. His voice was a growl edged with fire. "I don't buy cattle, and I don't buy women." The trader choked, eyes wide, scrambling under the weight of Jonas's grip. For a moment it seemed Jonas might break him in half, but then behind him a sound, a small cough, a child shifting nervously. His children's eyes were on him, wide, waiting. Jonas released the man with a shove that sent him sprawling into the dirt. He turned back to Elena. She had not moved, not begged, not spoken. Her eyes met his like a challenge. Something in him cracked. An old memory of his wife's eyes, not the day she died, but the day he first saw her, standing proud in a churchyard with a wildflower crown. He had thought then, here is someone who won't bow to storms. He stepped closer, his voice rough, torn from a throat unused to softness. "She ain't yours anymore. She stays here, 'cause no one else will keep her safe." The trader spat. Blood sneered but did not argue. He knew the strength of Jonas Hale. Coins could not buy courage enough to fight him. He spat once more, climbed onto his wagon, and left with the wheels shrieking against stone. Silence fell heavy. The children clung to each other, staring at the thin stranger now standing among them. Elena's ropes were cut, but she did not. "Run!" Her wrists bore angry red welts, her shoulders hunched as though every glance was a blade. Mary, the youngest, took a hesitant step forward. Her tiny hand reached out, tugging at the hem of Elena's dress with the innocence of a child, too. Young to know shame, Elena stiffened, but did not pull away. Luke scowled, fists clenched. "She don't belong here, Pa." His voice was sharp, protective. Samuel echoed him with narrowed eyes, while Anna stood quiet, studying Elena with a gaze older than her years. Jonas answered none of them. He simply turned, gesturing toward the cabin. Inside, that night, the fire crackled slow, shadows climbing the walls. Elena sat near the hearth, hands folded tightly, her shame wrapping her like armor. The children whispered among themselves, their eyes flicking toward her, measuring this stranger in their home. Jonas sat in his chair, silent, staring into the flames. The cabin felt tighter than ever, the air heavy with unsaid things. Every crack of the fire sounded like a gunshot, every creak of the logs like a warning. Elena's body remained rigid, her eyes darting but never settling, like a bird pressed into a cage. And yet in the flicker of that firelight, something shifted. Mary curled up beside her, placing her small head against Elena's knee. Elena froze, breath caught, but did not push her away. Her hand, trembling, hovered, then slowly lowered, resting gently on the child's hair. It was not trust, not yet, but it was the beginning of something neither Jonas nor Elena understood. Outside, the wind carried whispers down from the hills. In town, tongues wagged at the news already spreading. Jonas Hale had taken in a woman bought from a trader. Some said she was his concubine, others said she was cursed. None knew the truth, that within the walls of Timber Creek, something forbidden and fragile was taking root. Jonas sat long into the night, the fire dying to embers. His children slept, their breathing steady. Across the hearth, Elena's eyes flickered open, meeting his. Neither spoke, neither looked away. In that silence, in that unspoken tension, a storm began to gather. The days at Timber Creek settled into rhythm, though never ease. Elena rose before dawn, her hands learning the shape of work in a new life, stirring porridge with wooden spoons, mending torn shirts by lamplight, guiding small fingers over letters scratched into slates. She moved through the cabin like a shadow at first, quiet, cautious, never presuming her place. But slowly, the children began to orbit her. Mary clung to her skirts when the creek frightened her. The twins, though still wary, grew used to her sharp but patient instructions. And Anna, the eldest, found herself sitting close beside Elena in the evenings, learning to sew under her steady guidance. Elena's womb had been her curse in one world, her sentence in another. Yet here, in the hollow of Timber Creek, she discovered a strange kind of freedom. No one demanded children from her. No one measured her worth by her body's silence. The children already born filled her arms, her hours, her heart, with something she had thought lost forever, belonging. Jonas watched, though never directly. His gaze slid away when she caught it, his silence thick with words unsaid. He moved about the cabin with the same deliberate weight he carried, through the woods. But the presence of Elena shifted something in him. A new tension filled the air, as if each log he stacked, each meal she stirred, each laugh she coaxed from his children, added tinder to a fire he dared not light. Nights stretched, long. When the fire cracked low, Jonas sat in his chair, staring at the flames, his scar glistening in the dim light. Elena often sat opposite him, her face soft in shadow. The silence between them was heavy, not empty, filled with stolen glances, breaths caught, the tremor of something forbidden. It was during one such night that a storm rolled in. The wind howled against the cabin walls, rattling shutters, driving rain hard against the roof. Lightning split the sky, and thunder followed close, shaking the timbers. The children huddled together, wide-eyed, trembling at each roar. Elena gathered them close, her voice a quiet anchor, humming lullabies long buried in her memory. Jonas watched from across the room, his chest tightening. When a thunderclap rattled the cabin like cannon fire, Mary screamed and buried her face into Elena's shoulder. Jonas crossed the space in 3 strides, lowering himself beside them. Another strike lit the room, blinding. Instinct pulled him close, his arm around Elena, his strength bracing her as the children whimpered between them. For a heartbeat, the storm outside seemed to pause, the cabin holding its breath. Elena's hand brushed his chest as she steadied herself, fingertips grazing the scar that cut across his cheek. Jonas flinched, not from pain, but from the memory that scar carried. A falling tree, his wife's scream, the day the world had torn open. Her eyes lifted to his. For once she did not look away. The storm raged, yet in that silence between thunderclaps, her whisper cut sharper than lightning. "I don't need a womb to be a woman." The words lingered, heavy with defiance, with sorrow, with truth. Jonas's jaw worked, his throat tightening. His reply came rough, low, pulled from a place he rarely let himself touch. I don't need a wife to keep a fire burning. But maybe I need you." The storm swallowed the silence after, wind shrieking, rain pounding. But in that instant, something unspoken passed between them, like two rivers meeting, colliding, carving new ground. They did not touch again that night. Jonas pulled back, retreating into himself, and Elena gathered the children, rocking them until sleep claimed their fear. Yet the air between them was different now, charged, fragile, alive. Days turned heavy with rumor. Whispers snaked through town like smoke. The trader, humiliated, furious, had not forgotten. Folks said he'd been seen drinking with rough men. At the saloon, his voice rising, his words dripping with venom. "Hale thinks he's above buying. He'll pay. He'll pay double." Gossip carried far, carried fast. By the time it reached Timber Creek, the weight of it hung in every glance, every wary look from neighbors who kept their distance. Jonas said nothing, but his eyes darkened, and his axe fell sharper in the woods. Elena heard it too. She felt the danger pressing close, though no one spoke it aloud. Each creak of the cabin floor at night, each gust of wind carrying distant sounds, set her nerves alight. She began to move differently, more careful, more guarded, as though preparing for a storm far more dangerous than thunder. One evening, as the sky deepened to violet and the pines whispered with the coming of night, Jonas stood at the door of the cabin, his figure outlined by the last light. His children slept inside. Elena sat by the fire, needle in hand, though she had pricked the cloth so many times the thread tangled. Jonas did not turn to her, but his voice carried across the room, quiet, measured. "Trouble's coming." Her hands stilled. She said nothing, only lifted her eyes to him, the firelight dancing in them like sparks caught in glass. He exhaled, long and heavy, before closing the door against the night. And far off, beyond the reach of the pines, the sound came faint but sure, the slow, steady rhythm of hoofbeats on hard ground. The morning broke gray and bitter, the kind of sky that promised no warmth. Mist clung low over Timber Creek, threading through the pines like ghosts. The cabin sat quiet, smoke rising from its chimney in a thin, fragile line. Inside, the children stirred with the usual murmur of small voices. But Jonas stood apart at the window, shoulders stiff, scar-lit pale by the dawn. The hoofbeats came first, distant, rhythmic, unmistakable. They rolled through the valley like war drums, steady, growing louder with each passing breath. Elena froze, spoon in hand, porridge still steaming. Her heart clenched. She knew those hoofbeats, knew what followed them. By the time the horses broke through the trees, the cabin door stood open. Jonas stood tall in the clearing, axe resting in his hand, his children gathered behind him like fledglings under a hawk's wing. 6 riders drew up in a ragged line, steam rising from their mounts, faces shadowed beneath wide-brimmed hats. The trader rode at the center, smug as a crowfat on carrion. His lip curled when he saw Elena at the doorway, pale but defiant. "There she is," he spat, reins jerking. "My property. You stole from me, Hale. Time you paid." Jonas said nothing. His eyes narrowed, the scar on his cheek stark against the morning. He lifted the axe slightly, its edge gleaming, a wordless answer. The trader's men laughed, their voices sharp, cruel. One spat into the dirt. Another cocked his rifle with a snap that echoed in the trees. Elena rushed forward, grabbing Jonas's arm, her voice breaking. "Please, don't! They'll kill you!" Jonas did not move, did not speak. His silence was his oath. His children clung tighter, Anna pulling the little ones back, her eyes wide with terror. The wind rose, rattling the pine needles, carrying the smell of horses and sweat. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then the first shot rang out. Jonas swung his axe. The clearing erupted into chaos, gunfire cracking, shouts tearing through the air, steel meeting flesh, bodies colliding in mud and pine needles. Horses reared, screaming. Smoke from black powder curled into the mist like dark serpents. Jonas was a wall of fury. He moved with the precision of a man who knew no second chances. His axe split through a rifle stock, through a man's arm, through the breath of anyone. Foolish enough to come near his children. Blood splattered against bark, soaked the earth, painted his hands. But there were too many. A shot grazed his shoulder, spinning him, blood soaking into his shirt. Another cracked against his ribs, staggering him to one knee. Still he rose, teeth bared, axe dripping, eyes burning with something greater than rage. Love, raw and merciless. Inside the cabin, Elena scrambled. The children screamed, clinging to her, the sound of bullets splintering wood above their heads. Her hands trembled as she reached for the old rifle mounted on the wall. She had never fired one. Her father never let her. But tonight was not a night for fathers. She loaded it clumsily, breath shaking, and threw open the door. The world outside was thunder and fire, men shouting, Jonas bleeding, the traitor grinning like a wolf. Without thinking, she raised the rifle. Her first shot cracked through the chaos, clumsy, but true. One of the men fell backward into the dirt, shock frozen on his face. Silence rippled through the fight for a heartbeat, the shock of a worthless woman firing death from her shoulder. Jonas turned, stunned for the briefest moment. Elena's hands shook, but her eyes, those storm-dark eyes, were steady now. The traitor snarled. "Shoot her!" Gunfire roared back, wood splintered from the cabin walls. But Elena stood firm, reloading, firing again, each shot steadier than the last. The children huddled behind her, wide-eyed, seeing their protector reborn in fire. Jonas fought like a man with nothing left to lose, yet everything to protect. He was cut, blood streaming. Down his arm, his breath ragged. Still, he pressed forward, felling another man and another, until only 3 remained. The traitor cursed, spurred his horse, but found Jonas in his path. The axe buried deep into the dirt before his hooves, stopping him cold. Jonas staggered, chest heaving, blood soaking his side. Yet he stood unbroken. The men faltered. They had seen enough. Fear rippled through them, stronger than coin, stronger than greed. One dropped his gun and fled into the trees. Another followed, cursing under. His breath, the traitor, was last. His face twisted, his pride bleeding harder than his men. He looked at Elena, rifle aimed steady at his chest. He looked at Jonas, scarred, battered, bleeding, but unyielding. And he saw the truth. He had already lost. With a final curse, he turned his horse, spitting into the dirt, and rode hard back into the pines, swallowed by shadow. Silence fell heavy. The clearing stank of blood and gunpowder, of sweat and smoke. Crows circled low, calling harsh and greedy. Jonas swayed, the axe slipping from his grasp. His knees buckled, and he fell to the earth, the mud drinking his blood like rain. Elena dropped the rifle, rushing to him, her hands frantic against his face. His eyes fluttered, breath ragged. She whispered his name again and again, as if saying it might bind him to this world. Tears cut tracks down her dirt-streaked face. Jonas's hand lifted, trembling, finding hers. His lips cracked into a faint, bloodied smile. "Now you see." His voice was a rasp, each word a battle. Why I kept living. Her tears spilled, falling onto his scar, onto his lips, onto the man who had stood as a wall against death itself. The children gathered, close, silent, their small faces pale, their eyes wide with awe. Around them, the pines shivered in the cold wind, as though bowing to the 2 souls who had defied the storm. The fight was over. The attackers scattered, and in the blood and mud of Timber Creek, a broken man and a worthless woman had proven themselves stronger than all who came against them. Rain fell steady through the pines, soft and cleansing. By dawn, the blood of the fight was gone, carried into the soil, hidden beneath the roots of Timber Creek. The clearing smelled of wet earth and smoke, the remnants of violence scattered like ghosts, broken rifles, hoofprints pressed deep into the mud, a lone hat turning slowly in a puddle. The cabin stood untouched, though its timbers still trembled from the storm of men. Inside, a different storm had broken and passed. The fire was rekindled, its glow warm against the dark. Jonas lay upon his bed, his chest bound in linen, his breath shallow but steady. Each rise and fall was a miracle. His scars were many now, some old, some new, some that would never heal. Yet his eyes, when they opened, no longer carried the hollow weight of loss. Elena sat beside him, her hair damp from the rain, her hands folded in her lap. The children crowded the room, hovering like sentries, their faces pale with the memory of the night, but lit by something new. Reverence. They had seen their father bleed for them, and they had seen Elena stand as fierce as any warrior. For days, silence ruled. Jonas healed slowly, his strength returning with each stubborn breath. Elena tended him, her hands careful, her voice soft, her presence steady. She cooked, she mended, she soothed the children's nightmares. But more than that, she simply stayed. Not as property, not as prisoner, as anchor. When Jonas could finally sit upright again, he found her across the room, brushing Mary's hair by the firelight. His voice cracked from disuse, rough as gravel, but sure. They called me broken. She stilled, her hand tightening gently in the child's curls. He drew in a breath, his scar catching the flame's glow. They called you barren. Her eyes lifted, dark and steady. Jonas's gaze softened, the kind of softness that comes after war, when a man has nothing left to hide. But together, we are more than they'll ever be. The words fell into the cabin like a benediction, simple and absolute. Elena's throat tightened. For the first time in her life, the name given, to her, useless, barren, shame, slipped away like ash in the wind. That night, there was no fevered passion, no wild embrace. Their love bloomed with reverence, quiet and eternal. His hand brushed hers as they sat by the fire, fingers intertwining slowly, as though binding a vow. Her head leaned gently against his shoulder, the rhythm of his breath a lullaby she had never known. The children lay close, safe, their bodies curled like roots around them. The hearth crackled, steady, strong. Outside, the rain softened, leaving only the whisper of pines. In the days that followed, life took shape again. Elena became mother in all but blood. She rocked Mary to sleep, her lullabies now full and steady. She guided Anna's hand as she stitched, patient and proud. She corrected Luke's stubbornness with a firm, quiet strength, earning even his reluctant respect. And Samuel, wildest of the four, clung to her without shame, his laughter spilling freer now that the shadows had passed. Jonas worked slowly, his body not what it once was, but his will unbroken. He carved wood when he could, shaping toys for the little ones, handles for tools, beams to strengthen the cabin. His hands were rough, scarred, but steady. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the pines glowed gold with dying light, Jonas stood at the hearth. In his hand was a small knife, its blade worn but sharp. He pressed its edge to the timber beam above the fire and began to carve. The children watched in silence. Elena, rocking Mary in her arms, stilled her lullaby, her eyes fixed on him. Slowly, with the patience of a man who knew the value of permanence, Jonas cut her name into the wood. Elena. Each letter was etched deep, sure, unshakable. When he finished, he stepped back, his breath heavy, his scar pale in the fire's glow. He turned to her. No words were needed. The mark spoke for him, her place, her belonging, her permanence in this house, in this family, in his life. Tears filled Elena's eyes, but they did not fall. She only nodded, cradling the child against her chest, her lips curving in a quiet, reverent smile. The firelight danced across her face, across Jonas's scar, across the children gathered close. The cabin, once empty, now thrummed with life. Outside, the wind moved through the pines, not lonely anymore, but rich and low, like a hymn sung by the earth itself. And within those walls of timber and fire, two broken souls, once discarded and forgotten, found not just survival, but something eternal. Family, love, and the home they were never meant to have but had built together, piece by piece, scar by scar,